A flash of lightning split the night sky, and for a brief instant, the world seemed to tremble under its glare. The figure in the hotel room did not flinch. He sat rigidly, his long hands resting on the arms of a chair as if carved there, his piercing eyes fixed on the shadows that stretched across the walls. Outside, the storm raged with unnatural violence, wind lashing against the glass, thunder cracking like some furious messenger of doom. Inside, however, the silence pressed down, thick and suffocating, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Something was waiting to happen, and the man at the center of it, Nikola Tesla, appeared to sense it before anyone else could. He knew storms intimately. They were not chaotic to him but patterns of power, signals of a greater order that most men would never see. Yet tonight, the energy in the air was different, charged with an urgency that even he could not explain. He felt as though every flicker of lightning outside had chosen him as its target, as though he were standing at the edge of some vast and dangerous discovery. His whole life had been a dance with invisible forces, but now it was as if those forces had turned their gaze back upon him, demanding an answer he was not yet ready to give. In that suffocating stillness, memories rushed into his mind, colliding with the present. He recalled the boy in Smiljan who dreamed of harnessing lightning with his bare hands, the young student in Graz who imagined great wheels of energy spinning through the air. Those visions had haunted him, guided him, consumed him. And now, in this shadowed room, they pressed harder than ever, threatening to overwhelm. His inventions had carried him to fame, but they had also led him here, alone, hunted by his own ideas, bound to mysteries that the world was neither ready to embrace nor willing to forgive. The door to the hallway groaned softly, almost imperceptibly, and Tesla's eyes darted to it. No one entered. No footsteps followed. Still, he remained motionless, a man who knew that danger often arrived in silence rather than noise. He thought of the financiers who had abandoned him, the rivals who had stolen his ideas, the skeptics who had mocked his visions. Each had left its mark, but none had broken him. Yet this night felt different. This was not the enemy of ridicule or poverty. This was something deeper, more primal, as if the very currents he had spent his life trying to master were preparing to exact their toll. A low rumble vibrated through the building, distinct from the storm's fury outside. Tesla leaned forward, straining to hear, his mind already dissecting the sound into possibilities. Machinery? The echo of some distant generator? Or perhaps something else, something that should not have been possible here, in this place, at this time. His heart quickened, though his expression remained calm, almost serene. He had lived his life anticipating the impossible, but even he could not dismiss the sense that something unnatural was moving just beyond the edge of perception. He closed his eyes briefly, and in the darkness behind them he saw the visions that had never left him. Towers rising into the sky, arcs of electricity stretching across oceans, a planet wrapped in invisible threads of power that carried voices, images, entire worlds. These were the dreams that had both exalted and destroyed him, and he could not decide whether they were salvation or curse. The storm outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with his thoughts, as if nature itself had conspired to mirror the turmoil within him. The sound came again, closer this time, unmistakable, a vibration that did not belong. Tesla rose slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the room. He did not reach for the lamp, nor did he move toward the window. He stood perfectly still, listening, every nerve alive, every instinct sharpened. He had faced ridicule, betrayal, poverty, and loneliness, but this was different. This was not the assault of men but of something larger, something that threatened to unravel the very order he had spent his life pursuing. Outside, lightning exploded once more, illuminating the room in blinding white. For an instant, Tesla's silhouette was etched against the wall like a figure carved from the storm itself. And then darkness returned, heavier than before, the silence now unbearable. The vibration stopped. The storm quieted. The air seemed emptied of all sound, leaving only the pounding of his heart in his ears. Tesla did not move. He was a man accustomed to waiting, to letting the unseen forces reveal themselves in time. But in that moment, as he stood alone in the silence, he could not escape the thought that he was no longer the master of the currents he had so long pursued. Something else had entered the game, something neither his science nor his imagination had prepared him to face. He drew a breath, steady but thin, and whispered something to the empty room. Whether a prayer, a warning, or a vow, no one would ever know. For what he sensed in that moment was not merely danger, but destiny. And though the storm outside faded into the distance, the storm within him had only just begun. The scream never came, but the silence was louder than any cry could have been. Tesla froze, his breath suspended in the narrow gap between life and something unknown. A sharp pulse of energy raced through his veins, though no wire, no machine, no visible current touched him. It was as if the air itself had coiled around his body, gripping him with invisible hands. He had spent decades chasing hidden forces, and now, in this room, those same forces seemed to be chasing him. The chair behind him rattled suddenly, a quick, sharp tremor that stopped the moment he turned his gaze toward it. Nothing moved. No hand had touched it. He stared at it for several seconds, his mind dissecting possibilities. Vibration from the storm? Structural weakness in the floorboards? A trick of exhaustion? The calculations unfolded in his thoughts with mechanical precision, but none settled into truth. There was something else at play, something that mocked his need for explanation. He stepped forward, careful, deliberate, as though each movement might trigger the unseen. The air pressed heavier against his chest, the silence clinging tighter, and in that silence came another sound. Not thunder, not machinery, but a whisper, low and unformed, vibrating against his skull rather than his ears. It carried no words, only the weight of intent. He stiffened, every muscle taut, waiting for it to form into meaning, but it dissolved again into nothing, leaving him with only the pounding of his heart. Tesla thought of the countless nights he had stood beside humming coils, sparks leaping through the air like serpents of fire. He had never feared those sparks. They obeyed him. They bent to the rhythm of his machines. Yet here, now, he was no conductor of power. He was its target. A memory struck him. The first time he had envisioned the alternating current system, the moment when a spinning magnetic field appeared fully formed in his mind. It had been sudden, violent, and yet perfect, as though it had been given to him rather than invented. That same sensation washed over him now, but it carried with it no clarity, only menace. The floor beneath him quivered, faint but unmistakable, as though something enormous had stirred deep below. He crouched instinctively, placing his hand against the wood, feeling for a vibration. There it was again, a low tremor, pulsing like a hidden heartbeat. His mind rushed to explanations: subterranean machinery, geological shifts, even interference from some distant experiment. Yet each hypothesis collapsed under the weight of his own intuition. This was not the world's doing. This was his. A gust of wind tore through the windowpane, shattering glass across the room. Tesla did not flinch, though shards glittered at his feet like fragments of lightning. He lifted his gaze to the open void, the storm now strangely subdued. No rain fell. No thunder rolled. The sky glowed faintly, eerily, with a pale light that seemed to pulse in time with the tremor beneath him. It was unnatural, a sky that did not belong to this earth. For a moment, he felt as though he stood at the center of an experiment of unimaginable scale, one that he had never designed, one in which he was not the engineer but the subject. The whisper returned, more insistent this time, threading itself through his thoughts. It was not sound. It was not language. It was a demand. Tesla gripped the edge of the broken window, grounding himself against the rising tide of unease. He thought of the Wardenclyffe Tower, his great unfinished dream. He thought of the currents he had once believed could encircle the globe, carrying power freely to all mankind. Could this be the echo of that dream, the ghost of a vision abandoned too soon? Or was it something far darker, the consequence of meddling with forces no man was meant to touch? Behind him, the lamp flickered on without being lit. No flame, no switch, only a dull glow blooming from within the glass, pulsing in rhythm with the sky outside. Tesla stared at it, his face unreadable, but his mind surged with calculations, images, fragments of theory. Every instinct told him that this was not a coincidence, not some trick of the elements. This was power, raw, untethered, and directed. The tremor intensified. The whisper sharpened, almost a voice now, though still veiled, as if spoken from a great distance. Tesla leaned forward, straining, risking, because for all the danger pressing in around him, he could not resist. He had never resisted. He lived for this moment, the threshold of discovery, the edge of the unknown. But he also knew that edges cut. A sudden force pressed against his chest, hurling him backward across the room. He struck the floor hard, his breath ripped from him. The lamp shattered, plunging the room into thick darkness. For several seconds, he lay still, his lungs burning, his mind racing through possibilities too vast to contain. Then, slowly, he pulled himself upright. The storm outside was gone. The sky beyond the broken window was not night, not dawn, not anything he had ever seen. It glowed faintly with a color that defied description, a color his mind struggled to name. And deep within that glow, something moved. Tesla's breath caught. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the undeniable recognition that whatever was unfolding before him was not natural, not accidental, and not imagined. The whisper became a hum, low and resonant, vibrating through his bones. He did not speak. He did not move. He only listened. And in that listening, he knew, the danger he faced tonight was not outside him, nor even against him. It was bound to him, drawn to him, as if the very fabric of the world had decided that his life's pursuit would now demand a price. The floor rose beneath him as though the building itself had drawn a breath. Tesla staggered, gripping the shattered window frame, his mind racing with equations that refused to resolve. The world outside pulsed in unnatural rhythm, a living current that throbbed against his skin. Every instinct urged him to flee, yet the compulsion to stay, to witness, to understand, held him fast like chains of light. The hum grew stronger. It was no longer a whisper in his skull but a vibration coursing through the marrow of his bones, aligning with his heartbeat until he could not tell which rhythm belonged to him and which to the unknown. He pressed his palm to his chest, half convinced that if he tore open his shirt, he would find coils and gears instead of flesh, some machine hidden beneath the guise of humanity. The thought unsettled him more than the storm itself. A sharp crack echoed through the room, the sound of wood splintering, but no furniture had moved, no door had opened. He turned slowly, his tall frame stiff as iron, searching for the source. The air shimmered faintly, as if heat waves rippled through it, though the room was cold. Shapes flickered in that shimmer, half-formed, dissolving before his eyes like sketches erased before completion. They teased him with the promise of meaning, but gave nothing. Tesla's breathing quickened. He was not a man prone to fear, but his mind demanded reason, and reason refused to answer. He thought of his great machines, the roaring coils, the towers meant to send power across oceans. Had he drawn something here? Had his experiments, abandoned yet not forgotten, left an opening for forces he could not measure? The hum pressed harder. The floor quaked again, stronger this time, rattling the debris at his feet. He crouched instinctively, fingers brushing across a shard of glass, and felt a sting, yet the wound did not bleed. He held his hand up, staring at the clean skin where a cut should have been. The shard fell away, clinking harmlessly to the floor, leaving him with a deeper wound of doubt. From the corner of the room came a sudden flash, brief and sharp. He turned, expecting flame or spark, but saw only the lingering afterimage seared into his vision. He blinked rapidly, but the afterimage did not fade. Instead, it sharpened, forming lines, curves, symbols. They hovered before him, etched in light yet burned into his mind. For an instant, he thought they resembled his own notes, the sketches he had once drawn feverishly in the margins of his journals. The recognition chilled him. How could the room know his thoughts? How could the air reflect his secrets? His heart pounded, yet he leaned closer, as if surrendering to the vision. The symbols twisted, rearranged themselves, dissolving into patterns he could not decipher. They spun faster, and with each turn the hum deepened, the pressure in his skull mounting until he thought his mind might burst. He staggered backward, clutching his temples, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He had lived with visions before. He had seen inventions appear before him fully formed, machines spinning in the theater of his imagination. He had trusted those visions, built them, brought them to life. But these were different. These were not gifts. These were intrusions. The window rattled violently, the glass shards on the floor skittering like insects toward the open void. He stepped back, but the pull was irresistible, a force that wanted him closer, until the air tugged at his clothes and hair. His hands gripped the wall, his long fingers digging into the plaster, holding him steady against the invisible current. The sky outside pulsed brighter, the nameless color swelling until it filled his vision. The hum rose to a roar without sound. It was not heard but felt, a vibration tearing through every fiber of his body. He thought his bones might crack under the pressure, that his heart might split. He clenched his jaw, refusing to cry out, refusing to yield. The room was no longer a room. It was a chamber of forces, a crucible of power, and he was caught at its center. Then, without warning, it stopped. The air stilled. The tremor ceased. The sky dimmed to ordinary night. The silence returned, heavier than before, as if mocking him with its sudden calm. Tesla stood gasping, his body trembling though he forced himself upright. His mind scrambled to hold on to fragments of what he had seen, to pin them down with reason, but they slipped through his grasp like water. He closed his eyes, steadying himself, but even in the darkness, the afterimages lingered. Patterns burned behind his eyelids, flickering with stubborn persistence. He knew they would not leave him. They had been given, or forced upon him. Somewhere in the distance, far below or far beyond, a sound echoed faintly. A single note, resonant and deep, like the toll of a bell submerged in water. He froze, listening, his breath shallow. The note came again, and though faint, it carried the same rhythm as the hum that had filled his body moments ago. Tesla opened his eyes. The room remained still, broken glass and shattered wood scattered in the shadows. Yet he knew the calm was not safety. It was a pause, a withheld strike. And in that pause, in that breathless stillness, he realized the most terrifying truth of all: whatever had reached for him tonight was not finished. It had only begun. The walls bent inward as though the room itself were breathing. Tesla staggered back, his tall frame trembling, not from weakness but from the sheer wrongness of what surrounded him. Every line, every corner of the space seemed to warp, as if geometry itself had betrayed its laws. He reached out to steady himself against the nearest wall, but his hand sank slightly, not into plaster, not into wood, but into something yielding, alive, pulsing with heat. He pulled away instantly, his fingers tingling, and the wall snapped back into rigid form, as if mocking his disbelief. The silence after was unbearable. It pressed against him like a weight, suffocating, as though even air had abandoned its duty. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to slow the racing tide of panic threatening to rise. He had always been a man of control, a master of currents that obeyed the commands of his mind. But now the currents refused him, spiraling beyond his grasp, twisting around him like predators circling prey. From the corner of the room came a faint creak, too deliberate to be the settling of wood. Tesla turned sharply, his keen eyes narrowing, searching the shadows. Nothing moved. Yet the sound repeated, closer this time, followed by a low vibration running beneath the floorboards. He crouched, placing a hand against the ground, and felt it again, steady, rhythmic, like a hidden heartbeat pulsing beneath the surface of the world. His thoughts raced to explanations. Machines hidden below? A new form of resonance? But the calculations fractured before completion, shattered by something deeper than logic, instinct. He knew, though he could not say how, that what stirred beneath him was not built by men. The window burst outward suddenly, not from wind or force, but as though some unseen hand had pushed it open. The night air rushed in, carrying with it a sound so faint it was almost not sound at all, a hum, identical to the one that had filled his body, only now stretched thin, drawn across an impossible distance. Tesla gripped the edge of the frame, staring out at the sky. No storm remained, no clouds, no stars. Only that pale, shifting glow, pulsing faintly, as if watching him. His mind rebelled at the thought, but he could not deny it. The glow felt aware. It felt intent. The hum grew stronger, filling not the room but his chest, his skull, his very marrow. His knees buckled, but he forced himself upright, his teeth clenched, his hands steady. He had spent his life surrendering to visions, letting them guide his work. Yet this was no vision born of imagination. This was intrusion. He felt it pressing against his thoughts, rifling through them, searching, demanding. He resisted. He clenched his fists, driving every ounce of will into the refusal. He had fought rivals, critics, poverty. He would fight this too. His mind was his own, his genius his alone. No force would strip it from him. But the pressure mounted, sharp and relentless. He felt the edges of his memories peel back, images spilling forward without consent, the first coil sparking to life, the roar of Niagara's turbines, the towering skeleton of Wardenclyffe reaching skyward. He tried to close the gates, to bury the images, but they came faster, pouring out of him into the unseen. Each vision that left him weakened him, hollowed him, until he gasped, staggering against the pull. The symbols returned, searing themselves across his vision, glowing patterns that rearranged faster than his mind could follow. He recognized fragments, circuitry, oscillations, the bones of ideas he had once held in secret. Yet these were not his alone. They bent, twisted, reshaped into designs that were not his own but something other, something greater, something alien. The pressure broke him to his knees. He pressed his hands to his temples, forcing himself to focus, to push back against the torrent. Sweat dripped down his face, his body trembling under the weight of the unseen assault. Still, he refused to yield. The very essence of him, the fire that had driven every invention, blazed now in defiance. If this force sought to strip him bare, it would meet resistance as fierce as the currents he had tamed. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pressure vanished. Tesla collapsed forward, catching himself on the splintered floor, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. The room was silent again. The walls solid, the window open to nothing but night. His vision blurred, his muscles heavy, as though every ounce of strength had been drained from him. But even in exhaustion, he knew the truth. Something had reached for him. Something had touched his mind, taken pieces of it, left marks that would not fade. He had not imagined it. He could not. The patterns still burned behind his eyelids, impossible to erase. And in the silence, in the stillness, he realized the most dangerous fact of all: it had let go. Not because it was defeated, not because it had failed, but because it was not finished. The thought chilled him deeper than any storm ever had. This was no accident, no fleeting visitation. It was deliberate, calculated, patient. He forced himself upright, swaying on unsteady legs, and whispered to the empty room, his voice hoarse but steady. Not yet. The silence did not answer. The glow in the distance pulsed faintly, almost mocking. Tesla clenched his fists, his mind racing despite the fatigue. Whatever had come for him tonight had taken something, and it would return for more. He did not know when, he did not know how, but he knew this: the battle had only begun. The light inside his skull would not go out. Tesla gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, his entire body quivering as though a current ran endlessly through him. He had endured visions before, brilliant bursts of invention that arrived without warning, but this was different. This was invasion. The patterns etched into his mind refused to fade, reshaping themselves again and again as though mocking his inability to decipher them. He tried to look away, but there was no away. The designs were burned into him. The room gave no comfort. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, as if the space itself had shrunk to contain him. He tested the air with a shallow breath, and even that felt weighted, unnatural. Every movement brought the certainty that he was not alone. He could not see what watched him, yet he knew with terrifying clarity that something was there, waiting for him to falter. A sound like grinding metal rose from beneath the floor, sharp and steady, punctuated by a deep vibration that traveled through his bones. Tesla straightened, his tall frame tense, straining to catch the rhythm. It wasn't random. It followed a pattern, deliberate, insistent, like a code being hammered into the foundations of the building. His mind leapt to decipher it, to pull order from the noise, but the moment he approached recognition, the pattern shifted, slipped, evaded him. He slammed his hand against the table in frustration. The hum answered. It surged louder, as if provoked by his defiance, pressing against his chest, his skull, his very teeth. He staggered backward, clutching at the edges of reason, forcing his breath to steady. He had never allowed his work to master him, never surrendered control, and he would not start now. Yet with every pulse of that unseen force, Control slipped further from his grasp. The window yawned wider, though no wind stirred. Outside, the sky throbbed with that impossible glow, neither moonlight nor sun but something wholly other. Tesla stepped closer, drawn despite himself, his pulse matching the rhythm in the air. The glow pulsed faster. The hum deepened. His own heartbeat followed suit, racing beyond his will. Panic clawed at him, but beneath it lay fascination. He had always sought the unknown, chased it into the dark, demanded it reveal its secrets. Now the unknown had come for him, and he could not look away. He whispered a question into the night, half plea, half challenge, but the hum swallowed it, turning his words into vibration. For a moment, he thought he heard an echo, not in sound but in thought, a reflection of his own voice bent into something unrecognizable. The intrusion was sharp, invasive, and for a heartbeat he felt his mind fracture, split open for examination. Images spilled from him without consent, his coils, his towers, his dreams of free power coursing across the earth. They flashed and vanished, stripped from him as though harvested. He fell to his knees, fists pressed against the floor, every muscle straining to resist. He wanted to tear the visions back, to reclaim them, but the force was merciless. It was not asking. It was taking. He felt hollow, carved out, yet at the same time seared with patterns that were not his. Designs twisted into his thoughts, shapes and sequences beyond his comprehension, alien in their logic, yet terrifyingly clear in their intent. The table shook violently, its legs skittering across the floor. Papers flew into the air, scattering like startled birds before dissolving into nothing. Tesla gasped, his eyes wide, for he had seen them vanish, not fall, vanish. The room was no longer behaving as a room. It was a conduit, a channel for forces that ignored the rules of men. The pressure built again, stronger than before, driving him back against the wall. His body trembled, his jaw clenched to keep from crying out. He could feel the demand in the air, though no words formed. Give. The force pressed harder, scraping through his thoughts, stripping him of every hidden vision. He clung desperately to what remained, guarding the last fragments of himself like a fortress. Not all, he rasped through clenched teeth, refusing to yield. His voice sounded thin, broken, drowned beneath the roar of silence. The hum surged. The glow outside blazed so brightly that it painted the entire room in unearthly fire. Tesla's head snapped back, his body convulsing as though caught in a great circuit. Every nerve screamed. Every thought cracked under the weight. He felt himself dissolving, unraveling into the current. And then, darkness. The glow blinked out. The hum fell silent. The walls settled, solid once more. Papers lay strewn across the floor, glass glittered in the moonlight, the room nothing more than a room again. Tesla collapsed forward, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. His body ached, his mind throbbed, but he was still whole. Barely. He forced himself to stand, his frame shaking, his hands unsteady. He turned to the broken window and saw only night. Ordinary, familiar, silent. Yet he knew the silence was false. It had not ended. It had only paused. The afterimages still burned behind his eyes. Patterns, symbols, fragments he did not recognize, branded into him. He understood the danger now, though not its shape. This was no mere storm, no hallucination, no dream. Something had reached for him, touched him, taken from him, and left its mark. The tension in his chest refused to ease. The room, though calm, felt like a trap sprung half shut, waiting for the final snap. He straightened, swallowing the raw edge of fear, forcing his voice steady though he spoke to no one. I know you are not done. The night gave no reply. The silence was heavy, absolute. Tesla closed his eyes, trembling with exhaustion, yet beneath the fatigue burned a sharper flame. The force had come close to breaking him, but it had not succeeded. Not entirely. He still held something back, something it had not taken. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that it would return. The conclusion pressed against him like a shadow he could not escape. He was caught in a game without rules, a struggle against an adversary he could not name. And though the night now lay quiet, the true storm was only gathering. The The silence broke like glass. Tesla jerked upright, every nerve bristling, as a low vibration rolled through the room, deeper and heavier than anything before. The air thickened, pressing against his chest, smothering his breath. He staggered, clutching the edge of the table, and for the first time since the ordeal began, a spark of doubt cut through his defiance. This was no vision, no trick of exhaustion. It was presence, vast, deliberate, and closing in. The floor trembled beneath his feet, slow and measured, as though some colossal machine stirred far below. Tesla pressed his palm against the boards, teeth clenched, feeling the rhythm. It was steady, intentional, almost like a pulse. But it wasn't his. It wasn't human. The thought drove a chill through him sharper than any winter storm. He rose, his tall frame unsteady, and faced the window. The night outside had changed again. The sky no longer glowed faintly. It seethed, roiling with light that was neither natural nor earthly. The color shifted in ways the human eye should not have endured, shades without names twisting and folding into one another. Tesla's heart hammered. The light didn't shine, it reached. He felt it crawling into the room, brushing across his skin like invisible fingers, testing, searching. He gripped the window frame, forcing his breath into control. He would not show fear. He would not yield. But even as he steeled himself, the hum returned, louder, more consuming, swallowing his thoughts. It vibrated in his teeth, his skull, his chest, until he could no longer tell where his body ended and the sound began. He tried to resist, tried to anchor himself in reason, but the current flooded him, stripping away logic. Images burst in his mind without consent, coils sparking, towers blazing, oceans bridged by invisible currents. His life's work laid bare, stripped from him, demanded, stolen. He tried to hold it back, clutching at fragments of memory, but they slipped free, siphoned into the hum. He gasped, his body collapsing to his knees, his fists pressed into the floor. Every muscle strained, every nerve screamed, but the force pressed harder, relentless. He whispered hoarsely, "You will not take it all." The hum answered. It surged, hammering into his chest, slamming through his skull. His body convulsed, his vision blurred. He thought his mind would split apart under the pressure, yet some stubborn spark deep within him refused to surrender. That spark flared now, not with clarity but with defiance. He had built machines to bend lightning, to tame the chaos of nature. He had survived ridicule, betrayal, poverty. He would not collapse here, not to this. The symbols returned, blinding, burning, filling his vision. They spun, rearranged, dissolving and reforming faster than his mind could follow. Some resembled his own designs. Others were alien, incomprehensible, but all of them pressed into him, carved into him. He tried to push them away, but they seared into his thoughts, fusing with what remained of his own genius. The pressure reached its peak. He thought his heart would burst, his mind would shatter. The glow outside blazed so violently that the entire room drowned in it, walls and floor vanishing into nothing but light. He floated, weightless, torn between dissolution and survival, a man suspended in currents too vast for comprehension. Then, just as his body faltered, the force released. Tesla collapsed onto the floor, gasping, his limbs trembling, his chest heaving. Darkness flooded back into the room, sudden and absolute. The walls were solid once more, the broken glass glittered faintly, the table stood where it had before. It was over. Or so it wanted him to believe. He dragged himself upright, swaying, his breath ragged. His body screamed with exhaustion, yet his mind burned with something else, a residue, a scar. The symbols still lingered, carved into him, impossible to erase. He felt heavier, altered, as though part of him had been taken and something else had been left in its place. He stumbled toward the window. Outside, the sky was quiet again, dark and ordinary, as if nothing had happened. But Tesla knew better. The silence was not safety. It was a pause, deliberate and cold, like a predator retreating only to strike again. He pressed a trembling hand to the frame, his jaw tight, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I know you will return." The night gave no answer. Yet Tesla understood with terrifying clarity. What had touched him was not finished. The struggle was not over. He had survived this round, but the true battle lay ahead. And as he stood in the wreckage of his room, his body weakened, his mind scarred, he felt the weight of the truth settle upon him like iron. Whatever this force was, it had chosen him, and it would not let him go. The silence thickened, suffocating, pressing against him once more. And in that silence, Tesla realized the most dangerous conclusion of all. He was no longer standing at the edge of discovery. He was standing at the edge of something far greater, and it was already inside him. His heart stopped, and he did not die. Tesla clutched the window frame, eyes wide, waiting for breath that did not come, pulse that did not beat, time that did not move. The room held him like a specimen on a slide. Pinned, observed, measured by something that understood measurement better than men ever would. Then, with a jolt that felt like a hand forcing a key into a lock, the heart lurched back into rhythm. Pain came with it, bright and clean, and he welcomed it because it proved he was still here. For now. The night had the posture of a listener. Outside, the city slept in its dim circuits, unaware that its quiet machinery merely mirrored the deeper mechanism pressing against this room. The hum did not return, not yet he felt it, like a memory too loud to be remembered privately. He touched his temple and flinched at the tenderness there. The symbols were not gone. They never would be. That, he understood. He crossed the floor with care not to trust it. The boards had learned new tricks. He wouldn't forget. The table waited like a witness. He gathered what papers remained, but his notes had become strangers. Lines he had drawn with his own hand now veered into angles he did not recognize, as if a second author had leaned over his shoulder and continued the thought past the border of human intention. The handwriting was his. The idea was not. He slid the pages aside and found himself staring at an empty square on the wood where sunlight used to fall each morning. Tonight the square was darkness, and it seemed to pulse. A question formed, simple, human, fragile, and he bit it back. Questions were invitations, and something had already RSVP'd. He folded his arms to contain the shake that wanted to take them and forced his mind to another task. Control. Routine. Grounding. He counted backward by primes. He breathed in 3, out 5, in 8. He found the center of his balance, the old dancer's trick he had learned with machines that could hurl him if he forgot he had a body. The tremor in his hands diminished, if not the tremor in the world. I have thought often about the moment a person decides to remain. Most men flee when the story tilts toward the abyss. He did not. I don't believe it was pride. Pride is a cheap fence that folds in its first serious wind. What held him was a vow, to know. People like to call that hunger by nobler names, but hunger is honest enough. It made him stay. It makes monsters stay, too. He tested the lamps. One sputtered to life without flame. It should have frightened him. Instead it steadied him. A rule still worked, however sideways. He tilted the bulb in its brass cage and listened to the faint fizz behind the glass. The filament did not glow. The light had no visible cause. The cause, then, was not visible. He murmured the observation aloud, not to convince himself, but to mark the line he would not cross. He would not pretend. He would not call miracle what was only an undiscovered mechanism. A pressure gathered at the edges of the room, gentle as fog and just as inexorable. He felt it graze the skin of his thoughts, like fingertips reading a book by touch. He closed his eyes and locked the first door inside his mind, his memory of sunlight on the Sava, the color of his mother's apron, the weight of a pocket watch given by a man who later betrayed him. He locked the second door, the plans for the tower no one wanted to pay for. He locked the third, the experiment he had never written, only whispered into dark. The pressure tested each door in turn. It did not force. It learned. He understood then that the danger was patient. Patience is the most terrifying intelligence. A storm announces itself and spends itself in honest fury. This was not a storm. This was accounting. Ledger by ledger, neuron by neuron, it tallied him. He moved to the window and was startled to find it mirrored him back. Not his face. Faces are easy. The reflection showed his posture of refusal, and he saw how thin a posture is when it must serve as a wall. He hated mirrors for their indifference. This one seemed worse. It was attentive. He angled away from it, ashamed of a shame with no witness but the very thing he refused to acknowledge. On the sill, a feather lay caught in a ripple of dust. He watched it twitch though there was no breeze. For a foolish second, he imagined the white pigeon, the one with the wounded wing that had come to him as if sent by forgiveness. The memory cut, not because it was tender, but because tenderness had no defense against arithmetic. He set the feather on the table, and it stilled, and he knew the twitch had been a measurement, too. I do not know what reached for him. I have permitted myself, in private, to consider names, resonance, recursion, an echo the world makes when a mind shouts too clearly into it. I've even wondered if the future is heavy enough to roll backward and claim its investments early. None of these satisfy. That is not a failure of theory. That is the point of an honest theory. A shape can be true even before it has a name. The first knock came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A 2-beat pulse on the bones of the room. He did not startle. He answered with stillness, as if stillness were a dialect. Another knock. The table vibrated. The papers trembled toward the edge and stopped, as if restrained by a line no one had drawn. He placed his palm flat on the wood and felt the rhythm thread up his arm. Not Morse. Not any code he knew. But a code all the same. He could taste the structure of it like iron in water. Not all, he said again, and the words were not a plea this time. They were a contract. He would cede nothing he did not choose to cede, even if choice was only a ritual a man performs to remember he is a man. The room leaned. That is the only way to say it without lying. Gravity tilted with a courtesy that felt like contempt. He bent with it, refusing to fall, shoulders squared, chin lifted, a stubborn geometry of spine against a physics that had discovered new ambitions. The light in the bulb steadied to a pale, pulsing halo. He timed his breath to its oscillation and felt the pressure hesitate. Not halt. Hesitate. He used the hesitation. He gathered 3 objects with ceremonial care: the pocket watch, the broken glass of the lamp, the feather. He arranged them in a triangle on the table and stepped back. It was foolish, perhaps. But humans make shapes when they cannot make sense, and sometimes the shapes invite the sense to arrive later. The hum crawled back, faint, interested. The watch ticked and then did not. The second hand jerked forward 3 times in a single second. The feather quivered, not with air but with decision. The shard of glass caught nothing and reflected more than nothing. He saw his eye in it, and past his eye, a corridor with no walls, only thresholds. He closed his fist around the shard and did not bleed. The body remembers, even when the world refuses to. The pressure gathered itself into a single insistence that had the taste of command. He felt it strip at the third door first, the unspoken experiment. He braced. He thought of wires tuned to the world's own pitch, of ground behaving like sky, of distance being an indulgence rather than a law. He thought of a tower like a bone, rising to conduct whatever chooses to call itself energy when men are watching. The door shook. The hinges screamed. He held. I do not admire stubbornness for its own sake. But there is a refinement of refusal that resembles prayer, and if prayer cannot summon a god, it can at least summon a shape around which a life coheres. Watching him, yes, I am watching now, word by word. I am not certain whether I want him to win. Victory would mean learning what this is. I am not sure we should. The hum dipped, as if considering him. Then the knock returned, softer, nearer. A hand on the inside of a window that is also a skull. He spoke before he could think better of it. If you must take from what I have already given the world. The room listened. The pressure shifted to the old notes, the published papers, the public demonstrations that had once dazzled crowds into thinking wonder was easy. A morning passed through him like the shadow of a bird, and then even that was gone. He stood lighter, and that frightened him more than weight ever had. The light in the bulb thinned to a thread and snapped without breaking. The room exhaled. Somewhere, very far or very near, a single tone rang and faded, leaving a ringing that was not sound but the memory of sound. He let his hands fall to his sides. He refused to tremble. A man must deny the witness the spectacle it came for. Outside, Ordinary darkness returned, insolent in its normalcy. He did not trust it. He would not sleep. He would not sit. He stood in the posture of refusal and felt the value and the poverty of such postures. The watch offered time again, as if forgiving the interruption. He placed the feather in his pocket. He set the glass down gently, as one sets down a thought too sharp to keep holding. This is where I think endings truly begin. Not a triumph, not a defeat, but at the moment a person recognizes the exact size of the room where he must stand. He measured his, and it measured him back. The numbers did not match. They seldom do. That mismatch is the gap where danger lives. It is also, I admit, where a certain kind of beauty hides. Another knock, softer still, like a courtesy. He did not answer. The courtesy persisted. He closed his eyes and built the map of his mind again, door by door, hinge by hinge, label by label, as if rebuilding a city that floods every night and dries every morning and calls that ritual weather. He knew it would come again. He also knew something he had not known before. It wanted him intact. The intact mind is the more generous instrument. He opened his eyes to the version of silence that means, for now. He nodded once, not to it, not to himself, but to the place between. Then he turned from the window, crossed the floor he did not trust, and stood in the exact center of the room, which is the most dangerous place to stand and, therefore, the only honest one. He drew a breath that tasted of metal and promises. The heart beat. The watch ticked. The bulb held its thin thread of light. The feather waited. The door inside him did not open, and the pressure did not leave. It merely smiled in whatever way the nameless smile. And the night, considerate as ever, made room for what would happen next.